Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Laura Hanson with Connect My Brain. So glad that you are tuning in to our series on looking at different cases. And hopefully what it does is it just brings about an awareness of there's a lot of people going through a lot of things, and they have been for a long time. I hope you find some similarities if you are struggling with something with your child. Sometimes it is even with an adult. However, the focus is mainly on the pediatric population. However, we were all kids, and we could certainly have some of these things in our history, and they could be influencing what we're going through right now. So that's always possible. So today, the case that we're going to focus on is a 8-year-old boy with ADD or ADHD, concerns about it, not necessarily a diagnosis, and then also struggling with some anxiety. And I think, wow, that's just been such an eye-opener for me of how many kids are going through anxiety. And that part, the energy that it takes for them to try to keep it together, it's very, very difficult. And one of the things that I really like to focus on is we've got to understand this idea of how marvelous our systems are. However, adaptation doesn't mean that it doesn't come at a cost. And most of the time, what that is for our children, it could be anxiety. It could be cognitive brain fog, not able to perform well at school. The thing in looking at somebody's history is it can be different for every single person as far as the outcome is concerned. We all have the same stuff up here in our brain. However, the way it gets wired up is based on the individual experience. And that's why I really try to go over some histories, and the histories are longer than most because it's a blueprint. And it tells me the possibility of things that could have gone on that may have interrupted a child's development. But it's not a cookie cutter. So just because we might have similar things that went on in a pregnancy, in a developmental sequence, it doesn't mean that it's always going to end up just like what somebody else is going through. It's very individualized, okay? So let's dive in and begin to look at this particular case so that we can understand what went on here and the impact that it's had on this particular child, and then what kind of outcomes did we get, okay? All right, so in this particular history, one of the things that's very interesting is mom remembers that when she was pregnant with this child, she had a completely different perception about health or wellness or what should typically go on. Because many times in traditional healthcare or medicine, we have a tendency to tell people this is very common when you're pregnant. And that's not really an honest answer. You and maybe lots of people have these types of things, but it doesn't mean that we should accept it as normal. And so over the course of her child's life, especially what we're going to learn in this history is that this child had chronic ear infections, and there were a lot of antibiotics that were used. And there was also different rashes and eczema. So immediately when I see that in a history, One, I want to know how it was managed. And most of the time, people are using antibiotics for ear infections. And even the American Pediatric Association, about a decade ago, if not greater, came out and said most ear infections are viral, not bacterial. And so we shouldn't just automatically give antibiotics. However, as a community of parents, many parents have always wanted something in their hand, like a prescription, when they leave, because they're looking for, how am I going to take care of this? Give me something to take care of this. And so it's become a pattern, that this is what we've expected. I think it's very important that if we are going to see children with ear infections and just give out antibiotics, we should know it should be cultured. I realize it's an extra step and it does take time. And unfortunately, a lot of insurance companies don't pay for it, so it doesn't happen. And so antibiotics are still, to this day, they're just given. And we have to keep in mind what's the potential impact by taking something. You have to weigh it out. So when it comes to antibiotics and children, we need to understand that their gut is going to go through the first couple of years incredible maturation. And we have to look at the history or know what happened in those individual pregnancies. Like with this one, it was a C-section. So that's really kind of the first whammy. When you don't go through the birth canal, you don't get exposed to good bacteria. Therefore, you're kind of coming into this world already at a deficit. Then if we start bombarding a gut and an immune system with antibiotics, we're changing the microbiome. Now, by all means, if somebody cultures it and there's a bacteria, well, you can also get an antibiotic specific for a bacteria, and then you can address it. Unfortunately, that's not what typically goes on. And we are given broad spectrum antibiotics with the hope of, casting a big net and killing off everything. Well, you're killing off good as well as bad. And especially in the last 4 years, what I've seen in practice is there's so many children with SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which means it can be good or bad bacteria, typically both, but it's in the wrong place. So it's interesting how when I see that kind of finding, and then I look at the history and I start to realize that there was an interference in the development of the gut. And when there is an interference, there's a change. There's a change in the terrain. And your gut is just so far reaching. This is where the majority of your immune system is. This is also the area how you eliminate and get toxins out of your body. So if your gut is not working right, all these other systems are going to be impacted. And I look at mom's background when she got pregnant and things that she went through. She was going through some thyroid issues. And during her pregnancy, she actually checked off fatigue, shaky with missed meals, irritability before meals. That all of those have to do with the endocrine system. And then dizziness, hemorrhoids, feeling of bloated. So I'm already getting the picture of, okay, mom's got some gut issues too. Varicose veins. So there's some cardiovascular with hemorrhoids and varicose veins, where these might be those couple of things that people say, oh, it's typical for pregnant women to get this. Well, typical doesn't mean that it's expected. So just please keep that in mind. We start getting into irritation, mood swings, fears. I've noticed that in a lot of histories. Cravings, which have to do with gut and how well you're absorbing your vitamins and minerals in your food. And then felt like she gained weight super, super easy. Okay, so those were a lot of the things that this mama was going through. And what we need to realize is that that's where baby is living. And so baby is influenced by the health of mom. And one of the things that I would really encourage any young couple, if you want to start a family, some of the best things that you could do to ensure or to give a higher percentage of possible probability that you're going to have a healthy baby is that you spend a little bit of time finding out what's going on in your body and get your health state into an optimal level. Most people simply look at something subjective like I felt great. And unfortunately, there can be subclinical findings that could begin to tell somebody late 20s, early 30s, that there are some things that if you tweak now, it could be really easy, but you're literally preparing your body for having a baby. And when I've looked at hundreds, if not thousands, of history forms, there's such a clear picture that this is not what we do in our healthcare system. We do not promote this planning. And I think it's probably one of the best things that we could possibly do, given the fact, especially if we look at what's been going on really since the 80s and now with the last couple of years and what's been going on for our children. We've got to think in this more optimal direction. What can I do to be proactive, to put my body in a state of health that can give me a higher possibility of having a very healthy baby? What goes on in mom influences the health of her baby. The same thing, if it's a C-section, and I bypass the birth canal, I'm coming into this world already with a deficit. And that's no judgment, okay? Please, when we're speaking, always take it from me. I'm just trying to be transparent. I had a C-section. I wish I had never had, but unfortunately, I was not educated 35 years ago. And I felt like literally that my pregnancy and my delivery were completely taken from me in looking in the rearview mirror. And I know it's part of the reason why I feel so passionate about trying to help families, couples, children today, because women are designed to have babies. And if we go about it in an intelligent direction and we get educated and we learn how these bodies work, there should be really no reason outside of an emergency why a woman cannot have a vaginal delivery. Okay, so as I move through a little bit more of the history, remember, this is the blueprint that gives me big picture ideas. What is possibly going on with this child? So I also want you to remember there was a lot of endocrine things that popped up. We also, mood swings and fatigue were checked a second time. And so it's very common, especially after giving birth, lots of research in this area at really looking at the fatty acid system for really helping to balance out mood for prenatal, postnatal, and then again, fatigue pointing more towards that endocrine system as well as the mood. Now, as we start to get into the neonates portion, the baby was actually given formula at the hospital. Now, formula is powder. And if you look at the back of a can of formula, and this is no judgment again, but look at all the things that are listed that are in a couple of scoops of a powder. So what we've done is we've taken all this stuff and we have put it into a powder form. So we've changed it. So it is nothing like breast milk. It is nothing like colostrum. It is literally a condensed powder. And so putting that into a newborn when their gut is already fragile, because I didn't go through the birth canal, you're starting to put it into a highly reactive situation. And lots of times, these are the elements that I see from the very beginning that begin to tell me, where did the interruption occur? And the interruption occurred immediately. It occurred during the delivery. It occurred by going after the formula. And then when the infant's diet was evaluated, what did we get? We got oatmeal. We got pureed fruits, vegetables, veggies, and crackers. So there's a lot of still misrepresentation about what to feed a baby. And it's a classic thought to give oatmeal and cereal. So what I want you to begin to put into this little bucket for this baby. Okay, mom's state of health at the time of pregnancy, and then a C-section, and then some formula. And now I've got grains going in. And one of the best first foods that we could ever give a baby is fat, like an avocado. So if we look at how does a baby's digestive system come online, it's typically fats, carbs, and then proteins being the larger molecule and harder to break down. And there's a lot of different information regarding how to feed a baby. And I think it's going to be the best thing to do is to look at a solid reference. I really like the website of Weston Price, and I like the cookbook Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon, Fallon. What we're doing is there's a lot of like organ meats, which are fatty meats that can actually go in, and you can make your own type of baby formula if you need to go in that direction, but you're really making sure that the baby is getting everything that it needs. I would be very careful as well. Again, no judgment, but what I have seen in the past is a lot of vegetarian women that their babies have many issues in development because there was no real animal meat going in, which is where the B vitamins are very, very high. And the human body really does need that. So if you have a tendency to go in that direction, I would really encourage you to do some research. This is when I did my master's in sports health science with a concentration in nutrition. This is what I did. My paper on was children and developmental delay related to vegetarian diets. So this is an area that I've been quite passionate about, but you have to make the decision that's right for you, but just at least do some research, make sure you understand what you're doing. And, there's a lot of people that are going to come back and say rice and beans is a complete protein and you could just do it that way. It is not apples to apples. Okay. It's more like apples to oranges, meat to rice and beans. So just be mindful of that and do your due diligence and your research so that you know. Okay. So then we're going into the toddler, and that's when the ear infections begin, the rashes and the eczema. And so what this also begins to tell me, because I also found in the beginning of this particular history, the baby had a long duration of jaundice, meaning it was yellow, longer, and that is liver. And so when I go over here and I see rashes and eczema, there is the potential that we've got a congested liver. And the liver is the first place that we are filtering everything. And if the liver is congested, the next organ that's going to be your filter system is going to be your skin. So a lot of times gut health is related to what's going on in that liver, and the outcome being rashes and eczema. Okay. So then we're moving through. We've got upper respiratory infections. We've got allergies, asthma. This is in addition to the eczema, rashes, ear infection, motion sickness, learning difficulties, anxiousness, clumsy, food sensitivity, constipation, and even a strep infection. So when I look at this little person, that's quite a bit for the gut and immune system to go through in the beginning of life. And this is all being marked under that toddler postnatal development. So this little person has really gone through a lot during those developmental windows. So your gut matures at age 2, your immune system is age 3, and there's been insult after insult after insult. And that neuroimmune is a very classic finding that really does suggest it's going to interrupt the expected development for that child. Okay, so those are the highlights from the history. So now when I did my assessment, we had some abnormal posture, a lot of rounding of the shoulders, poor balance, poor coordination. In doing the metronome, where we're looking for the timing between both sides of the brain, we want those numbers to be under 100. And we were over 200 in almost every single category, which means that there's something altering how the communication from both sides of the brain are actually coming through. And so we put up little notes, like he was very easily distracted during that time. He kept trying to put his hands in his pockets. Why that's important is that you'll see lots of time body postures of a child literally trying to squeeze both sides of their body in order to just kind of give themselves feedback. So they might put their hands in their pockets all the time. They might put their arms behind their back and literally hold both sides together. So that timing is very important. When I look at endurance, I see this in so many of our kids, and we wonder why they can't pay attention, why they have lots of meltdowns, and lots of times it's because they're fatigued. And again, I'm going to say this probably every single podcast in this series. Children do not have a point of reference to tell you. Do you know that I feel better when I squeeze both sides of my body together? Do you know that I'm so tired that when I get home, all I want to do is melt down because I've been holding it together all day long? They don't have that. And that's why looking at a developmental assessment is so important. This helps us understand how they got wired up, but then how are they adapting? And why is this coming at a cost of him being able to pay attention, and why it's hard for him to kind of hold his emotions together? So when we did our endurance test, his oxygen actually started out at 96. All kids should be at around 99. His heart rate was up to 98. After the 3 minute, His oxygen climbed to 98, so that's good. His heart rate went up to 100. We do expect when we're doing aerobic activity that heart rate should go up. And then we're going to do a 5-minute one, and that's where really everything should normalize. So we got 98 and a heart rate of 115. So it really didn't come down. It actually caused him to have to work even a little bit harder. And I kept asking him because he was highly distracted, looking around. And that's also very common when it comes to kids that are, again, trying to hold everything together. There's certain reflexes that are really trying to keep them together, but it's putting them at a high stress profile. So those reflexes are called the withdrawal reflexes, and it's literally keeping them tied into their environment. So anything that comes into their peripheral vision, anything that they hear, they're going to literally look at. So I'm observing this throughout the entire assessment. The great part was he did lateralize correctly, which means that he was right ear, right eye, right foot, and right hand. So I know that around 4 years of age, his neurology was really trying to go in the correct direction. So now I have to take those pieces and try to figure out what then began to break down the situation. So when we looked at sound, all the sounds, low, medium, middle, and high, all lateralized to the left ear. And then when I'm looking at bone to air conduction on the right ear, that sound was skewed as it traveled to the right side. So I'm looking for patterns. I'm looking for, even though you might have lateralized correctly, where else is your neurology tripping you up and causing you to have an altered sense of perception? So sound was a big one. And his vestibular system was actually very balanced. For a kid that was clumsy, I found that very interesting. But the neat part about this little guy was he really wanted to go into baseball outside of just like a little league. He really wanted to get on like the travel team. And so the approach that we took was we're going to be your coach so that we can help you. And so when we looked at his brain map, the classic thing that we find when it comes to attention is a dysregulation between the theta brain waves and the beta brain waves. So theta is your precursor to sleep, and it is a dominant wave for a little child. By 8.5, your brain waves are more in an adult pattern. So we don't expect high ratios of theta. We expect them to be within range. But if you have a high level of theta, you might be a little bit more daydreamy. And you might be doing this because you're fatigued. And so those are two pieces that actually matched. We had an endurance test that was a little skewed, and we have this high theta. Okay, so what about the anxiety? Well, I'm directly going to put some emphasis on the gut as it relates to anxiety, because the majority of your immune system is there. The neurotransmitters are made there. Your body's balance is there. You can activate your vagus nerve that way. So if our gut is off, we can have a lot of emotional dysregulation. But in conjunction with that, we also had a lot of beta brain waves. So beta brain waves are more of our adult-like brain waves that we are going to use when we are in executive function. And so when a child has too much beta, so we've got this battle between the theta brain waves, daydreamy, and the beta brain waves, that can absolutely lead to anxiety. And that's a feedback mechanism. That's a feedback mechanism to the body. So the other thing that can happen is that this feedback is coming into this body and contributing to dysregulating the gut. So this is why it is so important that we've got to look at how the human body comes together. It is a mechanical being, like looking at balance, like looking at how well do you do on the metronome. It is a chemical bath. What are your labs like? So looking at labs are very important because it's going to give you a direct path to bring homeostasis back into this body. So we really had to focus on the gut. And by this time, Mom was in a completely different place and she was ready to go. And the family worked together. They did the nutritional program that we offer, and we get all the pro-inflammatories out of the diet. We rebuild that gut. We put all the nutrients back in. So now that child the family's learned how to eat, and now we can put good food in. Children do so much better with food, but we had to bring those nutritional deficiencies up. But now the family knows how to do it. And so we went through the process together, and they cleaned up the diet, they cleaned up the gut, and it's amazing how the child's palate even begins to change during this process. And now they are able to be on just a few supplements, a healthy diet. The child's gut is working the way that it's supposed to work. The nutrients are going to be absorbed better, and the child's going to feel better. And that's ultimately what we're trying to accomplish. We did neurofeedback during the entire process, and this child, which I was really excited about, he actually went through the program start to finish in a typical time frame, and we didn't even have to add an additional month. Most of the time, the program is about a 6 to 8 month period of time. Sometimes we do have to add a month, but in this case, we didn't have to do it. And what's even more exciting is he made the baseball team that he wanted to make, and the coaches were just absolutely astounded. So that's our case for this week. I hope you found some pearls. I hope you can share it with friends. It's so important to get this information out there so we can support our moms and help them realize that, one, it's so important to pay attention to what your gut is telling you. And there are things that you can do that can completely turn this situation around. Remember that you can go over to connectmybrain.com, and there is a website form, and you can fill it out, and you can request a complimentary consultation with me, and we can discuss your child. We are able to help you locally right here in Atlanta, Georgia, but there are things that we can also do remote. So even if you're not in Atlanta and you just want some information, please feel free to reach out. There's some neat downloads available in the podcast tab as well. If you want to call the office, 678-501-5172. Thanks so much for your attention today, and I will see you next time.